Stefan. Man, you said all the things I was going to say. I was going to say I was Ine, and I'm a service designer. Anyways. Yeah, so to give you a little bit of context, I work at Cisco, and it's quite a big company. It's about 70,000 employees, but not a lot of designers, maybe about 100 designers. So how I usually start my design workshops when I am there, and do these design thinking workshops, I start with this slide. Welcome designers, yes, that's you. I think in this audience, it's probably a lot more designers, probably a lot more UX designers even, but that's not the case where I work. The ratio for designers versus engineers is 61 engineers per 1 designer. So we built a lot of stuff, random stuff that is cool. So beside all those workshops and creating cool things, I also try to figure out what customers really need. So we have all these amazing maps, and sometimes they just want to find the loo. And my job is to figure out what that is. So what I'm going to talk about in these few minutes that I have is what service design, just to kind of set the stage there, because my experience is that people have different approaches and different ways to do this. So I just want to align with you guys and share what's my approach. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why is this important, or why I think this is important, and then the flexibility of it, because I think you can apply this mindset to a lot of different contexts, and I think you can find value of doing so in different ways. Hopefully there's not going to be a lot of questions in the end. I think always that's so tough. So, yeah. Service design is a method for designing experience that reach people through many different touch points, and that happen over time. So I want to break this sentence down a little bit. Let's look at method first. So service design comes from traditional design. So this is the traditional design process that was established by IDEO and Stanford, I think, in the 80s. Yeah, see some nodding here. With empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, and also the great university here is following that same process. So for me, that's really great that it's a method, and there's a lot of different disciplines within design coming out of this method, which I think makes it a great foundation for us to collaborate across different design disciplines, because we have some common ground. What's also great about that being a method, service design being based on a method, is that I can trust it. Because sometimes it feels a little bit more like this, that you go, you do research, you empathize, you try to figure out what people need, and then you end up in this black hole where you have no idea where it's going to go. Is it going to be good? Like, are you going to find the right problem to solve? So on. You just feel a little bit lost. So for me, that is a method. That means it's something that I can trust, and I can just let go of my fear when I'm in this dark hole that I am every fucking time. So, back to that sentence. It's also about people. So, service design, I think it's interesting because you can only design for a service. You can't really design a service because everyone is different and everyone's going to experience that service differently. So that woman and that man in the picture, they're going to have completely different experiences when they go and interact with whatever you crafted. And I love that. I love that I don't have control about that. And then going back to that ratio of like 61 engineers to 1 designer at Cisco, to create customer value, basically you need to find the right problem and then solve it right. So at Cisco, we are solving a lot of problems the right way, but there is not enough focus on the problem itself. For me, I think this should be equal, the problem and the solution. And just to share a little story about, from my past when I was working at Designit, this was one of my colleagues, Thomas Nordeng. And the story just stuck with me because it's so cute. But he was doing a project for one of the dairy producers in Norway, and they were going to redesign the milk carton and stuff like that. So did the whole empathize part where you go out and you talk with people open-ended and you're just curious. And brought a liter of milk and then a bag of like cinnamon buns, and asked all these questions about the milk carton, like, can we do this, what about that, what's the problem? And this old woman, she was one of these super positive old women that never have a problem. She was like, have no problem, I cannot imagine how this milk carton can be any better, you know? And then by the end of that hour, they had finished the whole liter of milk, because we were all kind of like drinking milk around the table, talking about this milk. And she just grabs the carton, throws it on the floor, and then she starts stepping on it. And we're like, what is going on right now? And then she explained, you know, that she was just not strong enough anymore to fold it, and in Norway we fold it to recycle it. So for her that was not a problem, because she had a solution. But for us that was an opportunity to make some changes. So the power of actually just listening and going out and exploring and being curious about people. Okay, back to this statement. So it's about touch points that happens over time. And for me, this is kind of one of the key things that maybe service design is a little bit different to design thinking, is that we don't think just about the product, we think about how it's all connecting. And for, I bet a lot of you guys here are UX designers, and you've been mapping flows on websites and apps and all that stuff. You know, and it's like the method that we're all coming from the same place. We also draw flow charts and all that stuff, but we think about how it's all connected, all those different touch points. So like, how is the call center connected to the website, to the app, and, you know, on the bus or whatever. All these things, we think about those things. And we don't go necessarily into the same level of detail of making that beautiful, detailed service in the end. And one of the cool metaphors that I like is like the theater. So you know how you can have the customer, imagine the customer as the people in the audience here, and they're interacting with the actors on the stage. And that's kind of like that magic interaction. For service design, we also think about what's happening behind the stage. So the people making all the costumes, like how can we make it better for those? Or the guys that is making sure the paycheck is going through for everyone. So we're thinking about the backstage, the front stage, and, you know, the whole complex service. Why? So people's expectations are changing constantly. We know that. And especially now with like technology being accessible at all times, I think people expect the same from services. And there's a lot of trends going around, how we're moving towards a more service-led world, and there's a lot of statistics on how people care less about stuff and products, but they care more about, you know, being a part of an experience. And this is a couple of years old, this study about showing how millennials are a lot more open to like ride sharing and stuff. And I think actually now, if you would look at the same graph, I think it's more equal across generations than it was then. And I don't know if you have these scooters here, but we have that in Oslo, where you can scoot around everywhere. It's just like the mobility is different than how we thought about it before, when it was a fancy car. It's about getting from A to B. And a few years ago, I worked in London at Fjord, and one of my colleagues there, she said this: every product is a service waiting to happen. I kind of believe that. I think that's a beautiful thought. And as a classic example of that, this is a long time ago, I don't even know the year, but you can Google it. Back in the times, you know, Rolls-Royce, they were selling engines for aircrafts. And then at one point they changed their whole business model to, instead of selling engines, they rented it out. And that led to a lot of new services that they could provide. They could provide engineers coming out, maintaining this, and so on. So it's kind of a nice example of how a product became a service, because now all the aircrafts have functioning engines, and they don't have to worry about that. And Rolls-Royce, they have a lot more predictability about their customers and, you know, so on. And they can create all these add-on services. So, the flexibility of service design. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I can imagine that there is a few different kind of design disciplines here, and maybe even non-designers. So for me, it's kind of a mindset of thinking about the complex and how it's all connected. And I think everyone can really apply that mindset and those kind of tools if they want to. And when I was working in like the agency business, when we were going out pitching to clients, we always talked about the 3 types of innovation. I don't know if you've seen that before. It's quite a classic. But anyway, there's 3 types of innovation. You can do core innovation, adjacent innovation, and transformational innovation. And the core innovation, if you think back of that theater that I just talked a little bit about, that can be going in, trying to understand an organization and optimize stuff. So optimize how that paycheck to the actors is happening and so on. That's core innovation. And that can also be innovation. Adjacent innovation is when you add more touch points and you add more value to your core product. And then transformational is when you just change the market, which kind of Uber did with riding around in taxis. So, just wanted to talk a little bit about that and transformational innovation. So, for example, Netflix is an example of that. Like, now we don't have to run home after this conference to catch Grey's Anatomy or whatever you want to watch on the television. You can watch it whenever and wherever you want. So that's a new way of consuming media, I guess. And back in the time, iTunes, they saw in the market that a lot of people were, downloading music, and it was illegal, and the musicians, they didn't get any money out of this. They were pretty much robbed. So iTunes made this new business model, making music accessible, so people stopped downloading that much, and the artists got paid, so that's pretty cool. And then a new kind of service in Norway that I kind of like is NSB, which is like the train and the buses and all the public transport. They also have now cars that you can rent, and you can drive around in the city, and it's like keyless, and you pay per minute. So instead of buying a bus ticket and you having to go to a bus stop and then all that, it actually takes you from wherever you want to go, exactly where you want to go, and you pay per minute. So it's pretty cool. And I think that service design can help in transformational innovation in the way that we go and talk to people, and we try to understand what they need, and we try to find opportunities. And I don't think necessarily that service design do that alone, but I think that we can definitely contribute to that. And then I want to talk a little bit about adjacent innovation. So, at Cisco, I work in the collaboration unit, so I'm trying to design the future of work, basically, and doing it more digital. So all that video, conferencing stuff, all that stuff. And then adding more value to that, we have these digital whiteboards, so you can, draw remotely. Yeah, so adding more value to the services, basically. And then this is a project from when I was back in London, in Fjord. We did a project in Cape Town for an insurance provider, and they wanted us to look into the lower middle class market, because this market was booming a lot in South Africa because of apartheid is not longer there. So now there's a bunch of people that suddenly get higher education, and they have a lot of power now. So they wanted us to help them get insurance. And by going down there, talking to a lot of people, we learned that, you know, insurance and internet and power is not, it's not given that you have that. Like every day at 4 o'clock the power runs out in all of Cape Town because everyone goes home from work and they start cooking. And internet, that was just not working. Like as a designer there, we went down, we did research, and we couldn't even share design files over the internet at the bank. So we had to travel back to London, do the design and come back. So anyway, we came up with a bunch of ideas of how to, you know, provide better insurance to these people. And one of those concepts were WhatsApp, because everyone in South Africa used that because it sends so extremely little amount of data. So we came up with these kind of ideas. Yeah, so in adjacent innovation, I think service design can help adding value by looking at new touchpoint opportunities. And then the last one, core innovation, I think is more interesting than it sometimes looks. So this was a project at Designit when I was there in Oslo. We did a project with Radiumhospitalet, a hospital there, and they came to us asking if we can create an app where the patients with breast cancer could see their whole, you know, all their appointments. They have quite a complex treatment. And we were like, yeah, sure, you know, maybe we can do that. And we went out and we talked to people, and what we learned is that when you're going to the doctor and he tells you you might have breast cancer until you get the test result, that's a much more painful part of that journey than when the doctor tells you you have breast cancer, because at that point you feel like you're taken care of by the healthcare system. So people could be like, they could rely on getting help and so on. But that waiting time was 3 weeks, and it was my colleague Maria Hartmann that was leading this project, and I was supporting on the research. But what we did with that insight was saying to the client that, hey, you don't need an app. Like, they know when their next appointment is. Like, they are just really, really worried if they have cancer or not when you tell them that they might. So instead of doing that app, we went in and we looked at all the processes happening in the hospital from the moment they might have cancer. And there's a lot of manual handovers and so on going on, right? Because no one ever designed that system, it just happened, which a lot of things do. So we went in and looked at that, and we learned that we could cut a lot of those handovers. Like, that's not necessary. It's not necessary to take that paper and put it on the shelf and then wait 2 days for another doctor to pick it up. And by looking at all these things, backstage, the waiting time was cut by 90%, so they could get the diagnosis 2 days later instead of 3 weeks. And that was the most impactful service they could have. Another core innovation example is at Cisco. So those design thinking workshops that I mentioned that I do a lot of workshops with the supply chain, so thinking about the whole product life cycle, and I think that can also create a lot of positive impact in terms of sustainability. Like, do you really need to ship stuff all around the world, you know, stuff like that. So there's a lot of innovation that can happen that is kind of invisible for people, but for me it's still innovation. Yeah, so service design can help do that. And just some takeaways from what I talked about. Yeah, I don't know, kind of don't want to read that slide, you know. You can stand here and read all day. Yeah. So, yeah, that's really it.